let's wait for a few more minutes for everyone to join. And during this waiting time, uh, if you want, and you can just type which place at which city you are join this meeting. Like me, I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, so I can just type Lincoln, Nebraska in the chat. If you don't mind, yeah, so that we would like to know where our audience are so that we can know a little bit better about ourselves. Yeah, I'm going to type Lincoln, Nebraska. Oh, we have Mexico, Germany, Estonia. Well, we have people from all over the world. That's great. Let's wait a little bit more minutes to see. Oh, have Spain, Switzerland, Netherlands, Germany, even from New Zealand. I think that might be a little bit late. So we have a very big fan from New Zealand. Thank you so much to attend our meeting from New Zealand.
I think it must be really early in New Zealand. Mohan, is it like 5 a.m., 6 a.m.?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it's too late. Okay, New Zealand time. Okay, 5, 6 p.m. Okay, okay, we may begin now, and we will see how many people. Okay, so that first I'm going to share um my screen, and I want to have a little bit item to share you guys. Okay, I assume you can share my slides. Okay, let's get started. We have about 47 people. And hello everyone, and happy November, and welcome to join our FlashNet ECN seminar. And we are and before we go to before we start, I want to share you a few items. First, you are all welcome to just follow our social media, and we have Twitter, and we have LinkedIn, and the second is that this video we will re we will record and upload to the YouTube. And lastly, if you have questions and if you have some ideas, so you can put in the chat, and we will answer at the end after because we have the and then we will answer all your questions after pre presentation. And today we are mostly and we focus on the artificial intelligence and the machine learning. We all heard a lot about AI and machine learning. It's powerful. It's a fashion. It's everywhere. And we know that this year that Nobel Prize are given to the AI pioneer, and I think that's why I didn't receive Nobel Prize this year, because two were given to the AI pioneer. So now we are quite curious about how we as Flash people to learn AI, and how we can use this AI and machine learning for our Flash data. So now I will ask Bailey to introduce our two excellent speakers, and then we will begin our seminar. Bailey, can you go ahead to introduce?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Bailey Murphy. I'm a postdoc over at Oak Ridge National Lab, helping out with some of the seminar organization for the FlexNet Early Career Network. So our first speaker today is Dr. Pamela Weisenhorn. Dr. Weisenhorn is an assistant computational ecologist in the Biogeosciences Division at Argonne National Lab, and her research focuses on the impact of microbial community dynamics on biogeochemical processes, and emphasizes the metabolism of greenhouse gases and redox dynamic systems. So she's been developing a new cyber infrastructure platform that incorporates AI approaches to microbial data into the next generation of fully resolved climate models. So super excited to hear about that. And our second speaker today is Dr. Benjamin Stocker, who is an assistant professor of geocomputation and Earth observation at the University of Bern in Switzerland. And in his research, he uses models and big data from Earth observation to try and understand how ecosystems function and how they're responding to climate change. So addressing critical questions about how much CO2 vegetation and soils can absorb, how heat and drought impact forests and grasslands, and how vegetation controls the global carbon, water, and nutrient cycles. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I'll hand it off to Dr. Weisenhorn to get us started.
Thank you so much. Let's see here. All right, does that look good?
Perfect.
Yes, yes, great.
Okay, great. Okay, so before I get started today, I wanted to thank the organizers for the invitation and for doing all the hard work to organize and get everybody here. And I also want to sort of publicly acknowledge before I get going here that I'm not what you would call a sort of a proper Eddy covariance scientist, right? So I have certainly taken some flux measurements, but only sort of in the context of studying the microbes that are impacting those fluxes. So probably each of you here today actually know more about the flux data and processing that data than I do. But what I'm hoping to offer you in my talk is sort of a stronger sense of the need for those data and how they fit into a larger picture of Earth and environmental sciences within the context of recent advancements in artificial intelligence. See if I can get the next slide. Okay. So what I'm presenting to you today is sort of my perspective and how I'm seeing the future of AI and sort of what the next steps are. But I really want to call attention to all of the folks, including some of the FlexNet Early Career Network members and alum who have greatly shaped that perspective as it relates to Flux data through the contributions to the AI for Methane workshop that I led organizing in March of 2023. And of course, this includes not only my co-chairs, Jim Eng, Jay Barden, Max Grover, Forrest Hoffman, Dan Rasciuto, and Charu Varaharajan, but also the program DOE program officers, Olga Tweedy, Paul Bayer, and Gabor, who helped every step of the way. And perhaps most of all, the many people who presented, contributed white papers, and participated in the lively discussions at the workshop itself. I don't expect for you to read all of the names here, but I did want to just sort of give you a sense that this is not my own thoughts necessarily, but those of many folks. And I also wanted to highlight for you the really key contributions of a couple people you may know. So Gavin McNichol, who's an alum, was an author on 6 of our white papers, and Yumi O, who I saw here today, who gave a very engaging presentation to help us kick off the workshop. So this is a really active area with a lot of people thinking about it. And so I'm not going to focus exclusively on methane or the outcomes of the workshop today, but I did want to highlight some of their importance to kind of put it in the context of what's going on in AI. And so the goals for the workshop itself were to identify the challenges and opportunities, both on the data and the modeling side, for advancing our understanding of the methane cycle. We're interested in methane for its own sake. Obviously, methane's a critical greenhouse gas, and it's quite important. But another motive of the workshop was to sort of map this out in a more general way, a way that can be applied to other fluxes, other gases, other cycles, to really sort of understand what the potential path forward towards incorporating AI into future research that implements sort of a model and experiment framework. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But also sort of how can we leverage AI? So it's using AI to help us with some of our data needs, some of our smaller scale challenges, but also feeding our data into sort of a larger AI system and thinking sort of down the road about how we can leverage that as well. So the Department of Energy has sort of a developed model and experiment framework. It's sort of like the scientific method, but modified just a little bit to really encapsulate the importance of sort of solidifying our knowledge, our conceptual knowledge into sort of process and systems models. And throughout the discussions at the workshop, we really found ways that AI can help accelerate work across all stages of the MODEX cycle, and not just sort of in the modeling specific areas. And so I wanted to take a moment to kind of explain how that might work and what that might look like, because I think it's a slightly different approach to how we think about doing science and what we're doing in that realm. So I'll start at the top of the cycle, sort of where the classical scientific method would start with hypotheses or questions, and the ability of AI models to help us to supplement what contextual metadata we have, so that existing data and knowledge can be better leveraged to develop hypotheses, as well as the potential for AI to help us expand data findability and usability across different domains, so that we all have better access to data and can develop better hypotheses as we go. As we move around to observations, experiments, and discovery based on those hypotheses, AI is really sort of a critical component in thinking about how to start using and leveraging autonomous sensor systems and edge computing to sort of quickly refine sampling location or frequency. And it's really, I think, going to be crucial for us to be able to improve process resolution. And as I'm sure you're all aware, that's having really high process resolution is important with a degree of spatiotemporal heterogeneity that we see in methane, but also that we see in fluxes in general, right? These are sort of a measurement of a lot of complex and interacting biology and geochemistry and hydrology and climatology, right? And so being able to get that high resolution is going to require smarter ways of collecting data itself. And so that ties in also with another of our findings in terms of optimizing sampling strategies and experimental design leveraging AI. So now that we're starting to get those process and system data in, AI can help to make those more findable and usable. They can help us with some of the critical challenges. And I think the Flux community has really been a leader in terms of employing machine learning approaches to ensure data quality and to do that sort of quality analysis and quality control, to do the necessary sort of gap filling and interpolations, to draw conclusions from the data we're able to measure. And also improving data value through sort of outlier detection, events identification, and classification and clustering algorithms to see when things are or aren't as representative as our a priori thoughts are when we set up the tower. And then as we're getting those data and trying to pull them into conceptual models, AI can help with connecting ontologies from different domains. Like I said, I'm from more of a biological and ecological background. And so sometimes the words that I use mean different things to people who are used to thinking about different aspects of science. And being able to connect across those and find data sets that have the same information, but are maybe calling it slightly different is critical. And they can also help us to identify the rough contours of new interactions and the sort of what this shape of that, the new knowledge that we're gaining really is. As humans, we're somewhat limited in terms of our pattern recognition skills, right? If something has a nice linear relationship, but we can kind of figure out lines pretty easy. But when you start getting into sort of more nonlinear dynamics, it gets harder for us and even our, sort of more basic statistical approaches to sort of detect what that is. Whereas the new AI and ML approaches are much better at capturing sort of the complexity in those dynamics. As we're going from our conceptual models to really solidifying that into a process or system modeling framework, AI can help us there too. Right now, there have been some recent advances, especially sort of in the weather realm, in terms of making surrogate models that are able to really replicate the complexity of physics-based models, but they can do it so much more efficiently that we're able to simulate a wider variety of conditions. And then we can even use that simulated data to train a model to look for more things, right? So we can get more information and a better understanding through modeling and simulation of extreme events and sort of difficult to capture occurrences. In the context of the methane report, we were thinking a lot about ebullition and the bubbling that we can't really quite capture currently in our models. And it can also help us with parameterizing or reducing uncertainty and sort of bottom-up process models. And then kind of going to the final step, but of course that then feeds into new hypotheses and questions, but model evaluation and interpretation. And I think that this is somewhere that the flux data is actually going to be really critical as we're getting larger foundation models and other more advanced AI approaches, is that AI can help us with assimilating data, doing sensitivity analysis and quantifying uncertainty. But it can also help us to identify and really characterize model measurement deviations and to really interrogate models. One of the challenges with a lot of AI approaches is that they're either gray or black boxes, right? And so being able to use a good solid benchmarking data, of which we need a lot, to do that is I think really critical. FluxNet and the community that contributes to it, I think, is really well positioned to take advantage of this. There are a lot of things that the community has not only gotten right, but really served as a lead in developing. And so I want to kind of take a minute to emphasize the importance of these things. These are things that you're familiar with, that you're doing, that you're thinking about. But I really want to sort of in the context of training foundation models, in the context of doing benchmarking and model evaluation of both top-down and bottom-up process models. It's really critical to have standardized, interoperable data, that's been taken at multiple places, but can actually really be used together without qualms, right? You have a vital and engaged community of researchers that's really global, as shown by the attendance here today. And you have a good progress as you're putting together sort of these larger data products like the FluxNet methane product, which was really critical and came up so often in our workshop discussions, to do sort of meta-analyses, prioritization, upscaling of data to understand what's happening. And you're also capturing really, really critical metadata in terms of time and place and how that can be related to other data. You know, these are the sort of universal characteristics that unfortunately aren't captured a lot by other researchers or researchers who are studying other things, but become really critical when trying to pull data from diverse fields together to improve sort of a holistic understanding of the global system. And one thing that, you know, as I was preparing for this talk, I saw and I was super excited about was this sort of just getting started, just being planned out data system initiative to take the data that you already have and the progress that's already been made and make it even more accessible, even you know, more real time, more sites available. And I think that that's so crucial and so important as we're moving forward and into a world where bigger data and bigger training is just going to be absolutely critical. So I want to give sort of a brief overview of sort of some of the things that AI can do now or that are currently being developed. You know, and I highlight here a couple of or a few of the white papers that were submitted to our workshop. And so I wanted to make sure that those authors got credit for their ideas because they are more theirs than mine. Although I'll tell you a little bit about them. And then I'll move into talking just for a brief minute, sort of about the future. So as I said earlier, I think that this community is already really advanced compared to say the biogeochemical community in terms of using machine learning methods for gap filling and interpolation. You know, there's work being done to develop causality guided machine learning to enable upscaling and really was sort of an emphasis on trying to capture sort of these longer term dynamics and dependence of fluxes on nonlinear drivers, right? Trying to capture lag times between when an environmental condition changes and when you see a change in the flux to account for, you know, all of the different aspects of the biology that have to change to make that happen. And, you know, also for developing sort of a universal model for capturing, and I think this is so critical, dynamic flux using machine learning. You know, we all know that setting up a flux tower and trying to get it sited and figuring out where to put it has always been such a challenge because you want to be able to know really what is contributing that flux, what vegetation, what environmental conditions. And so you think a lot about, you know, the wind direction and what you're going to be measuring, but being able to capture dynamic footprints can really help to tease apart some of the heterogeneity that we know is present in the system and allow us to really take the next steps in understanding what the drivers of this flux are and what the dependencies of fluxes are, sort of in a broad sense. And there's also, you know, efforts underway for using sort of long short-term memory neural network type methods to enable data assimilation, efficient data assimilation. And that in itself can help feed into sort of smart monitoring and changing in locations. One of our talks at the workshop was it's definitely sort of you know, still years out, but talking about using drones to capture different influx data in different locations in response to sort of shifting environmental conditions, right? And so if you're going to have it on a drone, it's got to be pretty both energy efficient and computationally efficient, so that thing can still fly and get where you want it to be as fast as you need it there. one of the strengths of AI is its strong pattern recognition, right? So across different methods, it's a sort of a consistent thing that when you're trying to capture nonlinear and really complex patterns, neural networks are particularly well suited at it. But that can help to develop approaches for event detection and identification in the data. Right now, you'll sometimes get data and not know whether to believe it or not. It's like right bordering on whether or not that's good, but it's so different from the time point before, right? And being able to actually get as much knowledge as we can out of that data and what those are actually telling us. Is it really instrumentation, or is there's something going on that we need to capture? And being able to then take a data set that has that and process it differently for different questions, right? Sometimes you might want to leave it in, and sometimes you might want to throw it out if you're trying to get sort of an average over a longer period of time. And it can also be used then for that quality analysis and quality control through that processing. And then we have, AI methods like feature selection, dimension reduction, and various surrogate modeling that can find those environmental control variables and mechanisms and sort of highlight those, pulling from the flux data and critically to that also the spatially explicit climate and environmental data. But you can pair that then with smart search and gradient-based or surrogate-assisted or Bayesian approaches to really optimize parameters that are feeding into physics-based models, because we do need both, right? We need to I think constantly ensure that we're evaluating the AI models, that we're not just taking a black box approach to everything, but that the black box approach and our physics-based models and what we know of the world is really matching up. And I think that was something that's come through loud and clear. And a lot of different of these AI workshops that I've attended and helped to organize or lead is that we're all really excited about some of these potentials, but we also are still a little bit wary of handing over the keys to just an AI black box algorithm, right? We learn the most, I think, from comparing those black box to the mechanistic and physics-based models. But as we're moving forward, because we are moving forward, right? We have more and more larger and larger open and closed as well, but open, large language models and other foundation models. As we're moving into this era, I think flux data is going to be really, really critical measurement. We all know that it's critical to capture sort of land atmosphere interactions and how the land is functioning. But it can also serve as a benchmark for both bottom up and top down models. And it's, I said before, but to repeat myself a little bit, it was so critical in thinking about how do we resolve differences and discrepancies in those models to have that FluxNet methane product. I'm super excited that the version 2.0 is on its way, because I think it's really going to advance our ability to understand the process and do the modeling. But Eddy covariance flux data is just, it's got such rich temporal information, and it reflects the combination of complex and dynamic processes over a variety of different timescales. And, it really provides a lot of opportunity to use this data to interrogate AI models of those processes that are occurring at different timescales, both in the atmosphere and in the land. And so I think that its abundance and availability is really going to be is going to be super critical as we're thinking about how do we want to develop foundation AI models to capture what's happening in the environment in the Earth system. And sort of the abundance of data that we have make it ideal for both training and testing of these models. But it's also really important for us to be thinking about, and I know from the white papers, many in this community are thinking about what biases are in the data, right? Certain areas of the world have better coverage than others. Certain ecosystems have better coverage than others. And so we need to be thinking about how we can both develop approaches that enable us, say, to put a flux tower where we have really heterogeneous landscape positioning or vegetation to capture all of that, right? Once we're able to do more dynamic footprints better, to feed this improved data, this more comprehensive data into these foundation models as they're being developed. And I think what I want to leave you with is some thoughts on where we need to be going as a community in terms of collecting data to really maximize our potential for advances in knowledge, right? One of the things that came up over and over again at the workshop was the need for increased co-located data. Whether that's, more biotic measurements, can we get a personal plea here? Can we get some more microbial data at the same places we're taking these fluxes? Can we capture plant phenology and differences in vegetation better? And also, can we use chamber data to help us develop those methods for doing dynamic footprints? And all of these data are going to require some of the same level of standardization, maybe not the same standards, but the same level of standardization as the other data. Dynamic footprints and capturing spatial heterogeneity is going to be really important. And it's going to feed in and I think both be driven by, but also feed into our ability to look at automated feedback between models and instruments and the measurements that we're taking. But also something that I wanted to point out is that the data that is available, data products are great, and they're the only things that some people can use, right? There's a lot of processing that has to go into flux data to turn it from what's coming out of the instrument to something that's really meaningful, sort of in a cross domain context, especially. But I think it's also critical for us to be thinking about what we do with sort of raw or minimally processed data, because as these AI approaches are being developed and as they're improving, there might be a need to go back and reprocess all of those data, and that's again, one of I think the strengths of the FluxNet products is that they really do capture the provenance of how the data has been processed. But also we need to be thinking about how do we make these less processed data more easily found and improve the access to both those and any sort of co-located data products. How can we really sort of simplify that sort of from a data infrastructure perspective? And I think the FluxNet community has had a lot of conversations to get as far as they have in terms of being leaders and developing sort of the standards and these interoperable data. And so I guess this is sort of my encouragement to kind of keep pushing, to push into other data, to the co-located data, to identify sort of what needs are in that space to address critical questions that might be shared across sites, because it'll only help us as we're developing these larger models with potential to be used to do things like Earth systems engineering for climate and these things that we're increasingly looking towards and trying to understand as the climate situation continues to develop. And so with that, I can stop through my screen here and take any questions, but also if you have any questions or anything that you need to reach out to me, anyone's free to reach me at that address. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Panama. Yeah, I feel that's very insightful. And now we will move on to our second speaker, and we will have the question session at the end. Okay, Benny, now it's your turn.
All right. So, okay, I assume you see and hear me well. Oops. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes,
Okay.
great.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity, and it's also for me a huge pleasure to talk to you here. The FluxNet Early Career Network is really a great activity, and I'm also pleased that you found this this workshop. The tutorial is online, and you've received the link to it. So what I'm going to do in the next 20 to 25 minutes is first start with some reflections of what we can do with machine learning and Eddy covariance data, and then just give you a brief overview over the contents of this tutorial. We will not have time to really walk through the tutorial, and there's also, of course, an emphasis on the implementation. It's really hands-on with a lot of code. You may ask me either just after this talk or also drop me an email. I'm happy to answer if I can. So there has already been a good motivation by Pamela. You probably are all familiar with the sort of things that we can do or that is being done in science with Eddy covariance data. That is just an example that from the young adult paper that's already 14 years old, that models can be trained at ET flux measurements in this example, can be used then for spatial upscaling, and there is also involves at the same time sort of a temporal interpolation or even an upscaling temporally. So that's really these two dimensions that are crucial for this type of modeling that is often done with flux data. There is a spatial and a temporal component. And of course, the data itself is extremely rich. There is data available from now a large number of sites, and it's really I guess a bit of a lighthouse activity in our research domain in general, the type of data that is being made available, open access to the research community through the network of FluxNet, but also a bunch of regional networks. This is just a product that we are using internally in our group, where we have been collecting now the most recent updates and releases from the regional networks and put them in one combined data set, just to give you an example. So I should probably not introduce too much about the Eddy covariance measurements, just to repeat that we have a theoretical understanding of the first order controls. And of course, thanks to this theoretical understanding, we can also devise machine learning model approaches. And I'm coming to what this actually means in a later stage. So yeah, we know the first order controls. Thanks to the data sets, we have information about their parallel evolution at multiple sites, together with the CO2 and water vapor fluxes and even methane fluxes in some cases. What is being measured, just to repeat this, is the net CO2 uptake, which then in a further step has to be partitioned into a gross primary production and ecosystem respiration. And I'm being asked sometimes why we're often modeling GPP and not net ecosystem exchange, which is the actual measurement. And I think this is understandable in the view of a mechanistic modeler. You want to first get photosynthesis right, and then try and resolve all the downstream processes. And of course, when we prescribe leaf area index from satellite observations, we have a good handle on modeling GPP first, and then not be affected by all the downstream processes and respiration. And therefore, we focus often on GPP. We think it's particularly informative. And yes, the theoretical understanding is there. There is a very important sort of first order control by solar radiation. So GPP can be conceived as the product of the photosynthetic flux density, the fraction of absorbed photosynthetically active radiation, and a so-called light use efficiency. And this equation, it should be noted, really only holds at longer timescales. So it should not be applied, for example, for modeling diurnal cycles of GPP, but rather to model weekly or even monthly totals. And then, of course, due to this strong control by solar radiation, in the data there is a diurnal cycle and there is a seasonal cycle. And so the diurnal cycle in solar radiation, which you see on the left side, is more or less directly translated into a diurnal cycle of GPP. And the same goes for the seasonal cycle. What you see here is just the curves of stations in different biomes. And so due to this very strong control by solar radiation, you should also be aware that by just knowing solar radiation and from satellite observations, sort of using estimates of the fraction of absorbed photosynthetically active radiation, we can already explain more than 2/3 of the variations in GPP. And so that's just by assuming there's a temporally constant and a spatially uniform light use efficiency, we can capture a large part of the variation in the data already. So what is left for machine learning is basically to crank this R² up to values above the 0.68. So this is really the null model benchmark that we want to hit. And of course, there's not just light, there are very important additional controls. And so, for example, the water availability controls, and they really affect the seasonal cycle of the fluxes, as is exemplified here by the energy fluxes, so the net radiation in black. And then you have a sensible and a latent heat flux. And the latent heat flux at this site here in California starts to decline halfway through spring, and that's because of the water limitation effects. And so we want to capture, you want to use a machine learning model to capture these additional controls beyond just simple light controls. And the downside of the machine learning models is, of course, that they're hard to interpret, often treated as black box models. And so we can also take an alternative approach to data-driven modeling by using, and in this case, we use the mixed effects models that are more easily interpretable. And so that's just to give you an example of some of these additional controls on GPP. Here we're looking at, again, temperature, the vapor pressure deficit, soil moisture, and the cloudiness. They all affect GPP. And what you see here is the functional relationship. So that's, I guess, very informative from a science perspective to evaluate these functional relationships. And they're not, they don't fall straight out of the fitted coefficients in a machine learning model. The additional methods have to be applied to determine them. The tutorial doesn't actually cover this aspect. So I'm just thinking of this now. It should be probably added in the future. So, of course, when you just start working with this data and you try to model something, you will be faced with the question about what is a right model and what is a suitable training design, model training design to choose. And this, of course, really depends on what you actually want to model, because it's a very different thing to model or to fit a model that is temporally generalizable or a model that is spatially generalizable. And this directly translates then, of course, into the methods that we have to employ during model training. And so in order to make these calls and devising the model training and choosing the right algorithm, we have to know the data. And I mean, this is it's sort of goes without saying that you before doing any statistical analysis in general or statistical modeling, you have to live with the data and understand it. And so, of course, in this aspect, we have to consider some known data structure in the data. And there are very clearly in the flux data temporal dependencies. And they're related to different processes that we know about. So, for example, the root zone water availability and the precipitation and radiation history affects the fluxes at the subseasonal time scale. Moreover, the acclimation of photosynthesis, so that's really the response of the physiology of photosynthesis. It evolves on seasonal time scale. So we know that over the course of a season, for example, the photosynthetic capacities, they change. And of course, this is implies sort of a non-stationarity of these functional dependencies between the environmental drivers and the fluxes. And ideally, a model learn them, but of course, this is subject to the structure of the model, so the algorithm type that we're selecting. And then, of course, it also matters what timescale you're modeling. So, for example, when you go even to diurnal cycles, we have to even include the aspect that plant hydraulics and the limited plant capacitance to transpiration will affect the diurnal cycle of evapotranspiration and also of photosynthesis and GPP. There are, of course, also legacy effects by past stressors. So we know, for example, if a drought happens in year X, that the fluxes will be affected in year X plus X or X plus 1. And so this implies that there is a temporal dependency even at the interannual time scale. That it's a hypothesis how important it is, but we might not want to just ignore it. And last but not least, of course, there's a CO2 trend. And this we know from theory and also from lab measurements that has direct effects on photosynthesis, of course. And then we also know that CO2 has been increasing and that this will affect the fluxes. So there is a hypothesis that we can derive from our known or our knowledge about the processes and the theory, that a model that learns temporal dependencies, so the general class of, for example, recurrent neural networks, of which the LSTM is just one example, should yield better predictions than a so-called sequence agnostic model. So random forest, you should know, does not learn any temporal dependencies. And so therefore we would expect that LSTM type model would yield better results in modeling these fluxes. I should mention that this is a hypothesis. It's actually not very clearly been shown. There is also spatial structure. This will affect the model generalizability across space. So, and that's a very essential aspect of flux modeling because it's often used in the context of spatial upscaling. And spatial upscaling, of course, will be affected by the fact that different vegetation types yield or generate different fluxes. And this is reflected again here from the example where we used mixed effect models, is reflected by the random intercept that is different, systematically different across the different vegetation types. And this example just visualizes that, for example, shrublands and open shrublands tend to have lower GPP than other vegetation types, given the same other environmental conditions. That's vegetation type, and that's more or less well specified from remote sensing observations. However, there's really a bit of an elephant in the room here, because subsurface water availability is a huge unknown. It's not directly observable, and it affects fluxes very strongly. And so this is an analysis that we've just recently published about trying to understand the diversity of responses in evapotranspiration to an increasing cumulative water deficit, which you see plotted along the x-axis. And each line here is at one site. And what this shows, this spaghetti of lines here, is that at some sites, evapotranspiration rapidly declines as the soil gets dried down, while at other sites it's not very responsive, despite very strong water deficits that have accumulated during the dry season. And so, of course, representing these functional dependencies across space is difficult, since they are so different across the sites, and since also in general we actually lack the meta information for making these distinctions here and informing the models. So there's a hypothesis that the spatial generalizability is aided by some meta information about the site. So that's actually time invariant information in that case. There are some good candidates that enable the upscaling, and there's some probably more problematic candidates that undermine spatial upscaling. And it's still a bit of an open question how exactly this bit of subsurface water availability undermines the spatial upscaling. So I've now talked a lot about these generalizability in space and time, and how do we actually now translate this into model training and testing. And so here the overall principle is that in order to test spatial generalizability, we have to block the data sort of in spatial units and hold out a part of these units during the model training and just use them for the model testing. And analogously, for testing temporal generalizability, we would have to hold out a block of the time series during the model training and use it just for the testing. And so there's actually a really nice paper here by Robert et al. That describes sort of these different strategies of cross-validation that are directly linked to the sort of modeling task that we are dealing with. And so if the modeling task is the spatial generalizability, the spatial blocking is the way to go to test these models. So now, just very briefly coming to the tutorial and what it covers. So it should be noted, of course, like with all of what I mentioned, that what we're doing in this tutorial is very, very simple. So in a way, it's the simplest of all setups. So we're doing within site prediction, so within site model training and evaluation. So it's not a spatial upscaling. We're using different types of machine learning algorithms and a linear regression model that does not model any temporal dependency in the data, and the cross-validation that is implemented in there does not consider these temporal blocks. So what can we even do with such a model, you may ask? And that's a good question. I guess such a model is basically to understand how well is the flux understandable given the parallel measurements of the environment. And the model application would in that sense really just be a sort of an interpolation, because we're not even testing the model's generalizability in time, and so it's not really a prediction or a temporal forecasting model. The tutorial covers some key methodological steps. It starts with a demonstration of overfitting. It shows, and I should also mention that all of the code is R code using the Caret library and some other libraries. Makes it extremely simple to work and apply some of these basic methods. And it's really supposed to lower the bar of entry to using these types of AI modeling for the flux data. It also contains cross-validation, pre-processing of the data. It explains what a hyperparameter is and how to tune it. And it does this with the examples of k-nearest neighbor algorithm and the random forest model. So the modeling task is to predict GPP from environmental covariates. This means that we are dealing with a regression problem, and this is supervised machine learning. So that means that the truth is known during the model training, and the model is trained on trying to predict the target data. And so Just I'm starting with an example of overfitting and what a hyperparameter is. We're using the k-nearest neighbor. So the k-nearest neighbor just predicts from the closest neighboring grid cells or points along your predictor variable. So the predictor here is x along the x-axis. And so k equals 2 means just we're taking for each point along the x-axis, we are considering the 2 closest observations along x and then use the mean of them for predicting the response. And so if you're just using 2 neighbors, we're getting this very wiggly curve on the top left. If we're using 150 neighbors and to take their mean, we're getting the curve on the bottom right. And so you can already see that there seems to be a pattern in the observations, and that's the points. And the truth here is actually that this is just a sinus curves. And this also demonstrates that if k is chosen to be very small, then our prediction gets very wiggly. And that's probably a reflection that the model just learns noise in the data. And so k equals 20 to 50 seems to be more appropriate here, while a k equals 150 already suggests that the model is too rigid. It doesn't learn enough from the data that it actually has. So in that sense, the k is the hyperparameter of the machine learning algorithm, and it needs to be tuned. And so how do we do that? And so in order to do that, we have to consider the holdout. So split the data into a training set and a testing set. And this is the initial split, which is demonstrated in the tutorial. And what we then usually do is to consider an additional split for the model training and the validation set. Now, the validation set is the one that is used for doing this hyperparameter tuning and also other steps of the model selection, for example, the feature selection. And only at the very end, we then after we've chosen the hyperparameters, we then assess the generalizability on the test set. And so the demonstration in the model is done using a linear model. And so here it's actually very simple. There's no hyperparameter being tuned and also no feature being selected. So it's just fitting a linear model, as you all know it, on some data yields the fit that you see on the left, and then you predict this to new data. This gives the one on the right. So you see here observed along the x-axis and fitted along the y-axis. And you see also some evaluation metrics, and this indicates that the training and test model performance is the same. And it reflects also what I showed you before, that a linear model is already getting us very far, 0.69 of r². And then, of course, doing this with a KNN, as I demonstrated before, what happens is when you choose a too small k, is that the model overfits, and that's reflected by the fact that the performance on the training set is much better than on the test set. And so the test set KNN performance is even worse than the linear model, although it's relatively, it uses a lot more flexibility in the model. But then a KNN with considering the 30 closest neighbors gets us much better results already. So we're strongly improving over the linear regression model, and the fact that the training and the test set yield identical performances indicates that the model is relatively robust. So we have not overfitted. And so this is reflected by this curve here, which shows the root mean square error for the number of neighbors considered in the KNN model. And that's what is usually done during the model training, right? So that you want to establish this curve to really identify the minimum. So the minimum error as a function of the numbers of neighbors considered. And you see here that an optimum is around 30. And that's also why we're using this 30 in this example here. And then what's also demonstrated in the tutorial is the application or the implementation of a random forest model. They're extremely popular for their simplicity in use. They require very little pre-processing of the data, and they yield very good results often. And this is reflected here also that by the fact that the model performance on the test set is even a little bit better than what we've seen before. So that's improves on the modeling, and in that sense would be now the choice among these three to use. And what's a bit surprising is that the model seems to completely overfit in the training set with an R-square of 0.91, but still yields a good performance on the test set. So that's for you to lay hands on the code. And I think we're just about through with time, and I'll leave it to you.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Benny. And now, we are almost run out of time. But I'm thinking if you are if you have to leave, and you can go. And if some of you have some question, you can also ask in the chat, or you can ask and then if we can see whether we can answer some of your questions. And yeah, we can wait for a little bit more minutes if someone has some question. Yeah, I think from Yujie, she has a question. Can Bennett ask, or can Bennett to help answer?
Yeah, so shall I read it first regarding the TPP prediction? The tutorial covered KNN and random forest. Are there any more up-to-date algorithms you would recommend? Second, it often takes a long time to tune hyperparameters and train models for long time series or multiple sites. Are there techniques you would suggest improve this process? Yeah, so XGBoost is also often yields even better results than random forest models, and they have become very popular. We're also looking into, like I mentioned, LSTM models. They're a bit harder to work with. And what's surprising is actually they don't improve much over sort of time agnostic methods as we are finding. Yet they do improve. And what's probably also important to note is that when you do these evaluations and you just dump all the data into one pot and you just derive one simple metric, you often miss a lot of the finer scale patterns that are really decisive. For example, whether the model captures water stress effects correctly, or a mean seasonal cycle, etc. So these should also be tested separately. In terms of how long it takes to run, a possibility is also to parallelize. There are some out-of-the-box methods to apply this on your own machine, or then, of course, even on a cluster that can drastically help. Of course, if you do a cross-validation, you could just distribute each fold on a separate node or core.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I have a question for both Panama and Benny. So, is it possible for the AI to process the high frequency data to generate half-hour plus data series? So because so far, I think most AI and I are working on the flash product of half-hour time series, and I'm just wondering, is it possible to do the high frequency 10 Hz data to generate half-hour flash result? I think, yeah, this is my question for both you and Pamela.
Pamela, you want to go first?
I guess I'm not
quite sure what you're asking. So you're asking in terms of the processing of the data itself?
Yes.
Just actually going from here's raw data, here's something else. I mean, one thing that AI can do is it can help write code to make that happen. I think that you do have to have sort of some coding to actually take, if you're taking a data and you're transforming it into a different data. You can do that. If you're looking at some aspects of processing the data, you know, there are also approaches you can do for sort of outlier detection or things of that nature if you're looking at that level of processing. But if you're really just looking at sort of taking raw data and trying to get it into sort of that 30-minute increment, I think there's sort of workflows for that, and AI can help to improve those workflows or make them more efficient. Beni, did you have anything to?
Yes.
I haven't thought about this
Yes.
specifically, but I would agree with the fact that bad data detection is potentially something that AI could help a lot, and that's probably also an important step going from the raw data to half-hourly data. But then, of course, also there's a lot of knowledge by the PIs that goes into this processing, and this should not be abandoned. And of course, like transparency and trustworthiness are sort of notorious concerns about some of these methods. And I guess there are probably a lot of advantages of doing it the way the community has been doing this so far.
Okay, thank you. And any other people has any other questions? If not, I will ask Yumi to introduce our next seminar a little bit, and then we will end our session quite soon. Yumi, do you want to
Yeah.
introduce? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have another FluxNet. Thank you very much for the great seminars. I really enjoyed listening to it. So our next seminar is in line of the seminar. So we are going to actually have a tutorial on how to use the AI to for the scientific application of using the FluxNet data to understand the carbon quantification. So our invited speaker is Dr. Licheng Liu at the University of Minnesota. So he's going to go through his tutorial and his paper that he just published this year in Nature Communications on the knowledge-guided machine learning, estimation of carbon, using the FluxNet data.
Okay.
So so we will send the registration link is available in the chat, but we will also send another email reminder to everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Beni?
Yeah, I had a question for probably Beni. I was just wondering, kind of from a zoomed out perspective, what do you think some of the greatest challenges or sort of cautionary notes are in using AI and machine learning for eddy covariance data, and how do you think that the eddy covariance community might address those?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've been thinking a lot about this. What I sort of hinted at during the talk were some of these points. We're finding, for example, from ongoing research that water limitation effects are really a very strong, large, or important source of uncertainty for influx modeling. And so we're finding, for example, that when training a general model that should model fluxes across multiple sites, we're getting very variable performances, especially for the dry end of the spectrum of sites. So we're having a large difficulties in modeling fluxes in at least temporally water limited systems. However, in energy limited systems, it works much better. So it's much more confidently simulated just through the fact that we know radiation at the surface pretty well, and that's the dominating control, while subsurface moisture is really, really unknown. And that's related to the fact that we don't know the below ground structure very well. We don't know soil depths, rooting depths, groundwater influence, and potentially even bedrock contributions to evapotranspiration. That's all major sources of unknowns that affect the flux modeling across space.
So do you think that if you're looking at sites that have, soil moisture monitored at the same location as the tower, is that able to reduce some of that uncertainty, or is it you need more than that?
That's
Also
a good question again. So there are reasons for why this should help, and of course that's helps because you know then better how much is actually left after accounting, for example, for soil evaporation, and also for the fact that most of the roots tend to be located near the surface, and that's where the sensors are. However, the trouble really is that there are also often roots below the sensors, and you don't know how deep below the sensors. And then I'm also finding that soil moisture data that is distributed along with, for example, FluxNet 2015 is often hard to work with because it's a bit less clean than some other variables in there.
So do you think that that could be a potential focus area for the Flux community, is to have more standardization of the ancillary data that's collected at the sites along with the Flux data?
That certainly helps. It's also just making a lot of meta information available is important. We're now trying to find out why it is that at many sites evapotranspiration seems to be larger than precipitation. Potentially, this is also related to the subsurface hydrology and specification, not just of yeah, I guess like the whole surroundings of where a site is located will be important to interpret these fluxes. And I guess it's also important to connect these with at least the smaller subset of sites with going deeper, considering the everything down to the bedrock. And this is being done also at some sites. For example, the critical zone observatories have been doing this until now. And I guess that's, I hope that there's more information to be gained from such observations.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, cool. If there's no other question, we can end our meeting now. And thank you so much for joining this meeting, and also I thank you for our two excellent speakers. And now it's time for us to say goodbye, everyone. See you in our next seminar. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your time. Let's end the meeting.